That was a very nice introduction, Russell. Thank you very much. And thank you for having me here today. This is a great group of people here to discuss what I think is a very important topic for our country. So it's really great that you're here, you're doing all this, and you're spending your time, and you want to learn about new things. Because a lot of what you're talking about here is obviously very innovative. And for some people, it's a little scary. For other people, it's really exciting, and that's kind of the way the world works. So I think it's great that you're doing it. And I think it is important to think about this topic broadly, the fourth sector and all the subsidiary points that go with it, in the context of really some of the larger macro things that are going on in the world right now. I happen to be of the camp as an optimist by nature, and I think as an entrepreneur you have to be an optimist. I happen to be of the view that the world is getting increasingly better, and the facts favor the optimist. Any way you look at it in terms of what's going on in the world right now, despite a lot of things that should cause great concern, obviously, but on a macro basis, directionally, the world is getting much better. And we have an opportunity to even accelerate that kind of pace of improvement if we think smartly about what the challenges are, what the opportunities are, and how we can all work together. And when I say work together, I mean obviously the private sector, the public sector, the nonprofit sector, and then obviously this fourth sector that is being envisioned by some of the great thinkers, not only in this room but around the country. And I've always come at challenges from the perspective that if people work well together and get along, you get better outcomes. And if you travel around the world and you go to places where economies are strong, and where standard of livings are high, and where challenges are being overcome, the one thing you always find that those places have in common is that they have very good relationships between those various sectors. In other words, the private sector, the public sector, the nonprofit sector, all get along well and work in a constructive manner towards solving these problems and pursuing these opportunities. And so I think it's really important, and I think a lot of the work that you're doing here really is in that vein, which is how do we coordinate all these great resources and all this great talent and all this capital really for the good of everyone. And that's really a philosophy that's animated a lot of my work on Capitol Hill, thinking about the world in that way. And if you think about what's going on from a macro perspective, there are some things that are very interesting, very concerning, but very exciting in terms of what's going on in the world. The thing that's very concerning is that there's a lot of needs, and a lot of people are struggling, and a lot of people are having a hard time dealing with kind of the macro changes that are going on in the world right now. And the macro changes that are going on in the world are really pretty significant if you think about how technological innovation and how global interconnection is really changing our economy and the world's economy. It's been a blessing for many people, particularly people who have great educations and live in certain countries or have access to capital. It's been an enormous blessing, which is why a relatively small percentage of the world's population is having such acceleration of their income. It's because they have a set of skills that puts them in the right place at the right time in history, and they're really benefiting from that. But it's been really challenging for other people in terms of grappling with these changes, and a lot of people are being left behind. And also at the same time, so many more people are coming into the global economy, and we're seeing some of the pain and suffering so many people have. So the needs are really great out there, not only in our own country, in our own communities, in our own cities, in our own towns, but really around the world. So the needs are really great. And the traditional kind of providers of assistance against some of these great needs, which is the public sector, is really, in many ways, strained. It's in part strained because of response to the economic crisis that hit us about 6 or 7 years ago at this point, and it's in part strained by demographics. So you have a situation where the needs are really great, the opportunities are really great, the innovation is really high, and the traditional providers of the need, or the traditional kind of shoulder against the need, is strained itself. Yet at the same time, because of what's happened in the world, you see this great kind of accumulation of wealth. We see a lot of, and it's an appropriate thing to talk about, whether we're talking about it here or whether the Pope's talking about it, income inequality that is occurring, which it is occurring, and a relatively small share of the population is accumulating great wealth. Not in my judgment because they did anything wrong, but because they happen to be at the right place at the right time with the right set of skills. So good public policy ought to figure out ways of getting more private capital working against traditional kind of problems that the public sector has taken on, not at the expense of the public sector, not not in a vein of kind of starving the public sector of resources and capital, because in my judgment, the public sector actually needs more resources to do the job it should be doing. But also, we ought to figure out smart ways of getting private capital working against these challenges. So I think a lot of what I try to do from a public policy perspective is really in that vein. And then to the extent it has the added benefit of embracing innovation, embracing private market forces, that's even a kind of a plus or a double bottom line. So these are the things that I think about from a public policy perspective. Russell mentioned my infrastructure bill, which is the most bipartisan piece of economic legislation in the Congress by any measure. We've got over 40 Democrats and 40 Republicans on a big piece of legislation that will materially increase our nation's investment in infrastructure to the tune of about $1 trillion. And it does it without any additional spending by the government, but it actually deals with some of the problems with our international tax system. A lot of you have followed how much money is accumulating overseas. We figure out a way to get some of that money home, provided it's put in infrastructure. And that's a really bipartisan idea. It's really a big macro public-private partnership. So it animates that idea. It animates even some small ideas that we have. I had when I was in the private sector, I helped a very good friend of mine and kind of a professional colleague start a nonprofit bank in Oakland, California. Some of you may have heard of it. It used to be called One California Bank, and then it became One Pacific Bank, and now it's called Beneficial Bank. It's a very successful community-oriented financial institution now, kind of up and down the West Coast, started by two great philanthropists and really smart people. And they wanted to start a nonprofit bank because it was their view, and they're correct, that a lot of the communities are really being left behind. A lot of disadvantaged, underserved communities really don't have access to a credible, fair banking product because there isn't a lot of economic incentives for the big banks to serve these communities. And so as a result, a lot of these communities are left with, I hate to say it, loan sharks, payday lenders, people like this. And so what you really need is effectively a nonprofit bank serving their needs, because people really do need a bank. I mean, you can give them all kinds of assistance, but still at the end of the day, they need a bank. It's kind of the anchor of their financial literacy, being associated with a bank, all these other things. And so we wanted to start a nonprofit bank, right? We said, people give money to all kinds of things. They give money to symphonies, they give money to hospitals, they give money to all kinds of things. They give money to help people in a lot of these communities, but we ought to start a nonprofit bank. We want to make a big charitable gift to this thing, and it might be a really great model. Well, it turns out you're not allowed to have a nonprofit bank in the United States of America. You can't do it because we have federal regulation that says these things have to be for-profit. And you look at those things and you start thinking about the fourth sector. It's a very small example where I think a lot of people around the country who are philanthropists would actually really like to fund a nonprofit bank to serve some of these underserved communities, using a banking model, using a lot of the expertise and technology and services that exist in a bank, but do it not necessarily for a for-profit motivation. Do it in a sustainable way financially, but not for a for-profit motivation, but really provide that service. So it's just an example. It's a really little example of some of the things that I think we as members of Congress can work on. The social impact bond legislation that I've sponsored with my Republican co-sponsor in the House, Todd Young of Indiana, who's a great member of Congress. He served our country. He was in the Navy. He's just a fabulous member of Congress and a great patriot. So I'm really proud to be working with him on this bill. But a lot of you understand, because you've probably talked about it here today. I know Jean Case, who's a good friend of mine, was probably talking about it earlier. It's a big passion of hers. But pay for success and social impact bond kind of approach to solving problems that have been really persistent, have been hard to deal with. And a lot of it's gone on the state level, but there's been a lot of areas where the states have not had really an incentive to go after certain persistent problems because the beneficiary of positive results is really the federal government, not the states. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense for the states to put in place a pay-for-success framework where they contract out the solutions against a really important problem in an innovative way to a third party, a nonprofit, who takes risk about whether they can deliver the results and then have the state pay the money, it doesn't really make sense for the state to do that if the savings go to the federal government. So we wanted to put in place legislation as a good first step, because we think there's actually a lot of things to do in this area that enables states and creates incentives, provided they do it against certain situations and in a certain methodology where the data is tracked carefully and the results are shared, where the federal government will actually make the payments on behalf of the states for putting in place pay for success frameworks, at the state and local level against problems where the federal government really gets the benefit if there's significant savings. And so that's what our piece of legislation has done, and we think it's got a lot of opportunities in this Congress. Because again, like a lot of public policy that I'm trying to do, we're really trying to bring together best ideas that the progressive movement has and best ideas that the conservative movement has and put them together. That's how you can build a bipartisan coalition, not by some mushy compromise, but by really seeking out the best ideas. And we're really excited about the Pay for Success social impact bond initiative that's going on in the country, because again, it appeals to all the things that I like about good, smart public policy. First of all, it creates more opportunities to put government to work against some of the big problems we have in society, which I'm very supportive of. It creates a way of bringing private market innovation, which we definitely need more of, into the public sector. It creates potentially much bigger allocation of capital against these problems, because right now, the way most philanthropists kind of think about their giving is they give money and it goes against the need and they try to make sure there's good outcomes. But they don't get anything back, obviously, financially. It's a gift. And so as a result, they have a certain allocation that they do towards these activities. To the extent we can actually create almost a new asset class of philanthropy, done in close partnership with nonprofits, where people put up money against a certain challenge, and they have a say in how that outcome is delivered, and they manage it, and they look at the metrics, and they demand accountability and transparency and all those kind of things, the things that kind of work in the private sector. And as a result, they get some of that money back because the intervention has worked. Then they can actually give the money again. And if you effectively create the equivalent of debt in the philanthropic sector, you will dramatically expand the pie chart of the amount of money people give, right? Because right now we have a pie chart of the global wealth in the world, and there's a sliver that's given towards philanthropy. It's a lot of absolute dollars, but it's still a pretty small sliver. And if you think about asset allocation, I would like to see people allocate more of their money towards philanthropic endeavors, towards things that have positive social outcomes, towards things that lift a broad number of citizens, Americans and citizens around the world out of poverty into a better standard of living, et cetera. If we can get more of the philanthropic dollars worked against this, again, it's a big win. It alleviates some of the burden from the public sector, and I think everyone wins. And by creating effectively a debt-like instrument for philanthropic activities, you effectively do that. Because if someone's giving away $1 a year, but they realize 50% will keep recycling, they're going to increase their giving by that amount. So that's what this endeavor is designed to do. So Todd and I are really excited about where this legislation can go. We think it's actually something that'll get acted on in this Congress. It has broad bipartisan support among progressives, among conservatives. We've got members on both sides of the aisle obviously supporting the bill, and we think it'll be an important step for the federal government to make in this regard. But the same kind of philosophy that goes behind this bill animates a lot of the things I'm working on and many members of Congress are working on, which is how do we bring the public sector, the private sector, the nonprofit sector together in a more collegial, constructive manner towards working against these problems. A byproduct of that is the creation of this fourth sector, because the lines get very blurry, as you all know. And there's things we have to do as a Congress to encourage more of that, because there are a lot. As someone who ran a for-profit company for most of my career, a public company, you have an obligation to your shareholders, and that's your obligation when you run a public company. So it gets tricky in terms of how much flexibility you have to use your company's resources for broader social goods. But there's work to be done there, and there's opportunities, I think, to make it better. So I'm just really excited to be working on this topic, and I'm really excited that so many people are engaged around it, including the people in this room and so many other great leaders. And I think there's a lot of things we can do. And the nice thing about it is we can do it without fighting. You know, this is actually about bringing people together who come from different perspectives and spend their time doing different things every day. And it shows that we can work towards the common good of our citizens. So thank you for having me, and God bless you all, and enjoy the rest of your conference. Thank you.